Welcome back. I hope everybody had a nice lunch. Yes? And we're moving back to our theme of the 4 elements here, and we saved air for last because honestly, I've seen Donna Howell-Sickles draw, and she conjures magic out of thin air. There's no other way to describe it, and that's what you're about to see. In fact, what's interesting is the drawing she's going to be doing for you is based on things she's seen around town since she's been here. So it's very relevant, very immediate response to her environment. Now, Donna's a very special person to me because my very first AWA show back in the Stone Age, I think, 2000, 2001, Donna was one of the very first people to come up to me and welcome me to Santa Fe and compliment the art, and she'd actually seen my painting and knew which one it was, and make me feel welcome and like a part of this organization. And fast forward a few years, she was the person that came up to me and asked if I'd like to be a signature member of this organization. Little did I know what that would lead to, but when I said yes. But before I ever met Donna or heard of this organization, I was in Scottsdale, in Meyer Gallery, and I saw this big, beautiful drawing of a woman. What did we decide it was? 40 by 60, I think it was. She had hips like I do, and she was fully dressed, no naked stuff going on, fully in command with a direct gaze, strong, striding, holding a pie. And I bake pies, and so it just stopped me in my tracks. It just spoke to me. And I'm not a Western art collector. I don't have that background. I had no idea who she was, but that was my first brush with Donna. And since then, we've gone on to become friends, and I'm a deep admirer of her work, but more than that, her spirit and what she does and what she infuses into her art, all of which I'm going to let her talk about. And she'll be talking and drawing, and what we would like to do is encourage, as she's going along, to ask questions during the drawing process so that she can respond, because that's kind of a nice organic way to go. Everybody good? So without any further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Donna Howell-Sickles.
I can't. I don't normally walk. I hate these lights. I don't normally walk onto a stage with an iPhone in my hand, but I don't have any photographs printed out because I took all the reference stuff I'm going to use later on my phone. Boy, I was nervous when I could see you, and now not being able to see you, yikes. I would not mind if you turned the lights back on.
Could we put the house at half?
Perfect. I like that better. A little bit about myself, I guess, but more importantly, a little bit about the imagery that I've used. I added up a few years ago when I first used the Cowgirl imagery, and I thought it would be kind of fun to do a promotion about, my Cowgirl is now X number of years old, and I realized how old she was, and I went, no, maybe I won't tell anybody that. I had the same reaction when my high school class sent me that email that said it was time for the 50th year reunion, and I thought they had sent it to the wrong class. Anyway, in college, it was back in the late 1960s, early 70s, and I didn't know what I wanted to be, actually. When I went to college, I came from a very small rural environment. I went to a 2-room schoolhouse. On a really big year, there were 30 kids and 2 teachers, and about 6 of them would be my cousins. So it was an environment where art had no place. It was great that you could draw, and by first grade, we didn't have kindergarten, it was very apparent that one of my cousins and I could both draw. So that wasn't something that they said, oh good, you can be an artist. That was, oh good, you can illustrate my book report for me. Which was fun, but it was one of those talents that in my upbringing was fairly useless. Just kind of an added bonus to make it more fun. And so I headed off to college, from this very sheltered, very religious background, and encountered a world that I found almost magical in its diversity. And I went to a mostly white college in West Texas, so you can imagine what I would have felt like somewhere else. And I discovered the art department kind of by accident. You have so many electives, and I thought I would take a drawing class as one of my electives. And I entered a room filled with people that were really more like me than anyone I had ever met in my life. And that sounds so very theatrical, but it's so very true. I didn't know that people actually thought about light and color and line and shape and looked at things just almost dumbstruck because they were so beautiful until I got to the art department. So I changed my major the next semester and did not tell my very frugal parents that I had done that until after the ad drop date, because I figured they wouldn't waste the money and make me pull out of school. And they stuck with me. They paid for the rest of my college education. And my favorite of my very theatrical mother's quotes was, after she had screamed, "Oh my God," and grabbed her head, was saying, "I don't want you to be an artist. I can't think of any artists that are worth their salt. You're headed for a life of poverty and depravity, not necessarily in that order." So at family reunions, she used to claim that the reason I worked so hard to make it was because I was trying to prove her wrong. That had an element of truth, but it always really ticked me off when I heard it. But I found my path, and for me, it was instantly obvious that this was what I could do. This was where I belonged. I had never been in a gallery. I had never even been in a museum. I had no idea what to expect. I only had the movie version of artist, which wasn't that wholesome. But being around other people who loved to create really kind of shaped my life. And then I guess it was my junior year, I was a full-time art major, and I was trying to play catch-up because everybody had already had all these classes, and I was scrambling. And I found a postcard in a junk store that had a picture taken back in I've since found, taken in 1939. And there were a bunch of pictures taken in this suite, and then they were colorized and issued as postcards again in the 1950s. And so they kind of just trimmed around this shape. So you get this horse that looks very sculptural and this woman that's very monumental looking, and the camera angle is looking up. And here's this woman in a bright red shirt with a green scarf and crossed gun belts. What ranch was that on? And chaps. Paint horse, and all the extras on the saddle and everywhere else. And she had a huge hat, and she was waving, and it said, "Greetings from a real cowgirl from the old Southwest." I grew up on a ranch in Texas. I never met anybody that looked like that. What Southwest were they really talking about? And that kind of drew me into the imagery, because although I identified it as completely invented, it was somehow an image that everybody my age identified with. Everybody my age had a little fringe skirt and those little pistols, and we ran around and saved the world every Sunday afternoon. And all my aunts wore red lipstick, and the magical thing about that card was that the color register was just off a little bit, so her bright red lips were right here. So it kind of increased the real, unreal. And that was really what drew me into the imagery. I didn't think of myself as going into Western art. I was trying so hard to be a very, cutting edge. As, from West Texas, you can't really see the cutting edge, but you know it's out there. And you're trying hard to find it. So the fact that I wound up living my life inside the Western art world is kind of amazing even to me. But I was looking at this image, and I was realizing the appeal it had to me, and all the teachers are always saying, draw what moves you, draw who you are, what's important to you. And I do believe that you come with a fixed set of color preferences and ideas about composition. So I decided to run with this Cowgirl thing. And it was more, I mean, honestly, I thought I was drawing at that time an invented image. You guys slow me down if I talk too fast. That's kind of a fatal flaw of mine. A lot of people tell me I don't have a Texas accent, and that's because my mother taught me how to speak, and she spoke at the speed of light. So I have a hard time going slow enough for people to understand me sometimes. Anyway, back to the Cowgirl. So I started doing some research, and the first few paintings and drawings that I did were very monumental. They're very little detail. If there was a face at all, it was just the red lips, and they were very static, not much movement. And then I moved from there into, as I discovered the women that helped create this mythology and realized how vastly popular the Cowgirl imagery is. It has been used to sell everything from sex to soap for over 100 years. Honestly, it's amazing. So, trying to figure out why, part of it is she's an appealing figure. She's a costumed figure, so she can be as strong as she needs to be, but she's outside your reality. It's hard to object to somebody who's slightly outside your own reality. You can say very strong things with a costumed figure that are not in your face, as they would be if someone walked up to you and said the same thing. So I realize part of her appeal is that each of you can put what you think about the freedom of the West into that image. So she has huge potential for telling stories. And I have always been interested in religion and mythology, and I've studied and read a bunch. And I realized at some point in time, after I really got started doing these images, and our daughter, by this time, had gone through all the broken parts of your young life and gotten to the really good stuff. And I had married a wonderful man, and I had a baby girl who was 2. And these paintings were beginning to be shown in galleries, and it was kind of exciting because, you paint a lot, and you wind up with a lot of paintings. And I've always been afflicted with this addiction to scale. And so I had a room full of paintings that were all over 4 feet square. 4 feet and up. I was limited only by the size of the door and how big my truck was. And even that wasn't much of a limitation because you could hire a shipper. So I realized one day when I went in this storage room that I was down to almost nothing in that storage room. So when I was asked to do something or send a piece somewhere, I was going to have to make it. Well, that was panic-inducing, because from here on out, everything has to be made right now. So it was a very busy, exciting time. And the Cowgirl, by then, I had discovered a lot of real women who went into this, and I had discovered a lot of women in the West. And there was a photographer in eastern Montana who took some amazing photographs, and she's now part of the Cowgirl Hall of Fame as well. There were women all over the place. And as I did my research, I realized that about 80% of the press in the late 1800s, when the rodeo Wild West show would blow into town, 80% of the press was about the daring women in the Wild West show. I didn't know a single one of them. I had never even heard of them. Didn't know their names, didn't know they existed, didn't know they competed head-to-head with guys in a lot of things. I had no idea that these women who were tough enough and funny enough to ride all night long in their stock cars on the railroads to get to the next gig could pull it out and do 3 shows a day, 4 days in a row, load up their stock and get in that trailer and ride with them again. And one of the things that fascinated me about a lot of the early photographs is that easy, almost dance-like intimacy between the riders and the horses. And I realized they lived with those horses. Those horses were not an add-on. Those horses were an extension of who they were. And each party was fully aware of what the other was capable of. So it was an interesting time, and for me, a great discovery that these women had existed. And I was shocked and appalled that I had no idea that there had been strong women like this or that they had ever been popular. I suspect they were the first female athletes in the U.S. to ever make a living for themselves from their sport. I don't see that printed anywhere, but the timeline fits. And yet none of us knew anything about them. So the Cowgirl Hall of Fame came along in the 80s, I believe, and started collecting these stories. And I'm so thankful that there is an institution out there that is devoted to women, that collects stories of women in the West and celebrates their accomplishments. Because each one of you in the audience, if someone else looked at your life, you've already had an amazing life. Just being an artist for this long, and I know I see gray hair out there somewhere besides on me, being an artist for that long speaks for itself. It's a deliberate choice, and it's a choice that you have to make over and over and over again. It's not something that's ever easy. And when I went into art, especially when I was in Western art, one of my professors said, you know, a woman doesn't have much chance of making it in the arts at all. But I'm afraid if you go into this Western art world, you won't ever make it. That was just another person to push back against. Because I figured he had never been in anybody's market. How would he know? So it was a great, okay, this is kind of snotty, and I apologize. I had a great deal of pleasure in giving him a signed book later in my life. Made me feel really good. Anyway, so it was a decision I made blind based purely on the fact that I liked what I did, I liked what I had to say, and I figured, when I found drawing the cowgirl imagery, it felt like I had something to say. It felt like I had something to say about all of us. And then when I added in the third component, which was the mythology, and realized that the American West is still an agrarian culture, and most mythologies, not all, arise inside an agrarian culture. So you've got the same animals, you've got the same degree of hard work, you've got the same reliance on fate, luck, and weather. So the stories are the same, and they fit like a glove. It's not like, oh, yes, and she made this into Zeus and Europa. No, it's when I was walking around town taking pictures, and I went out to the rodeo grounds, there is the most beautiful white bull out there. I hope he's good, because he just looks like he should be. And he was just laying there looking at me, and I was like, my gosh, if that's ever the the embodiment of Zeus before he stole Europa, there he is, you know. So that's kind of what the drawing is going to be based on today, because it goes back to a motif I used early on, and it incorporates something that I've seen today. And, you know, cross your fingers for me. This part's a little nerve-wracking, but this is how I always start everything. I always start everything with just an idea, and maybe I've done a couple of sketches. And I did a couple of sketches with a ballpoint pen in my notebook earlier today. Usually it works better. The only bad drawback to this is I tend to draw really large, and so sometimes it goes zooming outside of this paper size, which is easily fixed with an eraser. So we'll just take off and see what happens, and please ask questions because that will help direct the dialogue. Okay. When I was younger and couldn't afford good paper, when I did start buying good paper, gosh, some of it cost $40 a sheet. I won't even tell you what it costs now. And I would stand in front of it, and I'd be so in awe of the beauty of the paper itself and so afraid to waste it, that one of the things that I started doing was putting a border on it to get started. And I have in my studio this little straight edge that I carry around all the time. I've knocked both ends of the little T-square part off. But there you go. But anything, just something will work. Any place to start. And then as I was doing it, and this is a curved, oh, that's going to be fun. That's enough to start. And then you start thinking about how you're going to fit all. And I had so many fun ideas out there. I'm obviously going to have to revisit Zeus and Europa again, which I always thought was a fun story because it's where male mythology overtook and as it spread, It would take deities in little isolated areas and incorporate them into this grand cosmology. So Europa was a creation deity of some kind on her own at one point in time. So then he incorporated her into his mistress stories, and that's kind of how we know it. Okay, so I'm going to use that wonderful bull, but he's too big for paper this size. So we'll start over here. We'll go down here. Yeah, right here. So if that's my head size, then the bull can't be any bigger than that. Soft vine charcoal. And the paper is a Reeves BFK gray, heavyweight. I've already gotten him too big. He'll come back, I promise.
What did I say about thin air? Laundry. Into and out of. What did you didn't like that also?
A dirty chamois.
Okay.
They give a little more character. Say that one more time. I think it gives a prettier line. And you're going to go back and draw over this and edit this, and all kinds of things are going to change. And, you know, the reason people draw is because they think this is beautiful. You know, you have to like the way it looks. I'm far more attracted to line than I am, to line than I am to color, although color's pretty darn fabulous. He's laying down in case I haven't given you enough clues yet. And you should probably be looking at him instead of my sketch. The sketch is better for layout, but the real deal is hard to beat. No.
Donna?
Yes, ma'am.
You started out doing kind of static figures. When did you start adding all the motion?
There was actually an evolution to the imagery. I started out doing the static figures, and then as I became acquainted with the women who helped kind of create this, and I started adding in the camaraderie that I saw and the excitement, and I realized so much of their life was about the choices that they made. Then they had to be more real people, and they had to be smiling, and then they started just jumping all over the place. I may be in trouble because I'm so in love with the way this guy looks. I may have a hard time. I may not have enough distance there yet. Let this go right over there. Now, you all know, and I even know, that bucking bulls are not longhorns. But I need a longhorn here. That's my drawing.
I'm a city girl, I did not know that.
No, they would never put any cowboy or cowgirl on something with horns that could actually go all the way through their body. No. Can you imagine the flack they would get for that? Okay, here we go. And the backbone for a resting bull kind of slopes down. This is going to be about 30 inches or slightly more, depends on how beefy he is. And what I'm going to do next, those of you that know anything about livestock are going to go, yeah, right. Okay, I know that bull skin is wiggly. I know that. But I'm still going to let her sit right here as if she weren't about to slide off. So I'm going to put a boot right here. And a kneecap. And a thigh. And a thigh. Okay, we'll come back to the boot. But it's going to be right in there somewhere. Waist, hips, backbone. Okay, I didn't firmly decide to do the reclining bull until I saw them put this up on the stage, and I went, okay, I can read the symbols here. And boots are the most wonderful footwear ever. You cannot live a good life without protective footwear. You never know what you're going to have to wade through. Okay. Okay, so she's going to be about that big. 1, 2. Huh. I'll move the horn. Y'all are so quiet, you're making me nervous. This is exactly my process. I would not lie to you about that. Yes, they do. They cover a lot of them. And I usually spray it before I start the color, just so I can hang on to the lines I want to hang on to. Lasco fixative. It is. It's a Reeves BFK Gray. That's just too many of the same thing.
You work on more than one thing at a time?
Absolutely. I have the attention span of a gnat. No. I had a model earlier. She sat for me for a couple of minutes. I tried to memorize the useful stuff. Don't know if I did or not. We'll see.
So for those of you that came in late, the bull reference is a picture she picked up over at the rodeo here in Steamboat.
We'll get back to that eye.
Do you sometimes think the drawing looks so good you don't want to color on it?
Absolutely. I've kept a lot of drawings black and white. Okay, from a marketing sense, it's way harder to sell black and white than it is to sell color. Or at least that's been my experience. I could be completely wrong about that for you. Nope, not going there.
Do you find it hard to work while you're talking?
Everything about this is not normal. Oh, I lost my photo, sorry. Y'all have to go over and look at the rodeo stock, even if you don't go see the rodeo. I'm not a huge rodeo fan. I just love the animals. Although this year I've been blessed with being in a position to get to do a lot of first woman things, and I would have thought that by now I would have run out of them, but in 2018 they invited me to do the poster for the Pendleton Roundup, which is in Pendleton, Oregon. It's been a prestigious rodeo since 1910, and they've had a poster almost every year. And some of their early posters were done by illustrators, and if you saw them, you'd recognize them. They became quite famous. So I am actually the first female artist they've ever asked to do a poster for the Pendleton Roundup. I'm also the first artist they've ever asked to do a female subject for the poster. So I was like, really? 1918? I mean, 2018, and that's still available. Because way back in the 90s, I was one of the first women in the collection, the Crinler wing at the Buffalo Bill Historical Center in Cody, Wyoming. And there were two of us in that original collection, Ann Hansen and myself. And Mr. Crinler, whose first name I've forgotten by now, but he used to own part of Club 21 in New York, was a big fan of Cody. And he had helped build this whole wing to put their modern art in. Their definition of contemporary art is way different than y'all, so don't even try to figure that out. But Ann and I were the only two women there, and he walked in and he goes, "Why are the girls here?" And he explained to him that our work was in the collection, and so when we were taking the photograph, he was like, "Okay, well, I want the girls with me." Of course he did. And I was talking to Ann Hansen about that years later, and she goes, "Yeah, I think I actually cracked a molar that day." Okay, well, I'm not quite sure what this person's doing yet, but we'll get there. And I'm making myself nervous, so my line is getting all jagged. See, sometimes you can crop stuff and it looks like cropping. Sometimes you can crop stuff and it looks like amputation. And we'll see what category I fall in. Okay. The art world has changed so much. I mean, I was lucky to get to live through and be producing Western art in the 80s and 90s, when it was really so exciting and it felt so new and we all felt so relevant. It was just cool. And today's world, for me, galleries at the beginning were such a wonderful institution. You know, I loved it. I loved being there. I loved the socialization. And everything has changed. They're no longer they no longer have the value of being the place where people get to see your imagery. Everybody can see your imagery any time they want to. So opening all things about gallery that I grew up loving are simply gone. And finding a market, and I have been in making art for 40-something years now, or more, and a lot of my art is now on the secondary market, as you know, people downsize and age and die, and their children have no interest whatsoever, and so you can go online and look for art, and I have a lot of people who will call me and say, "Oh, I just bought one of your paintings. I'm so excited," and they will assume that I know they did that, but they got it at an auction, and there's no way you'll ever know from an auction unless you know the auction and they just happen to let you know, or they ask your permission to use the image in advertising for the event, which is something that you have to remind them that they're legally obligated to do every now and then. So being an artist has actually gotten way more complicated. More of it is your job. Not that any of us are shirkers, or we would not have made it here, but a lot of it is job skills that you have to relearn. You know, and in the old days when you got an interview for a magazine, it was really a lot of fun. You got to have a nice long conversation with somebody, and then they wrote an article and they sent it to you, and you talked about it and sent them by mail images, and it was fun. And now you get an article, and frequently they send you a list of questions and say, "I'd like you to answer these. And you know, send us some digital images, and we'll pick one." And then until it comes out, you just never hear a thing. So in a lot of ways, it's become less personal. So it's a harder place for people to tell their independent and individual story. So when Carol was talking about the blog thing, I was going, you know, that may actually be the best idea I've heard all day, because we are all storytellers, and if they only get to see the visual part of your story and they don't get to hear the you behind it, it's not as engaging or as relevant. You know, and all of us, with the downturn in the art market and going from having, being able to support ourselves to wondering how we're going to make that work next time. Okay, I lost my train of thought. You just have to find a way to tell that story. You have to present who you are, because she's absolutely right. They're buying a piece of you and your story as much as they're buying a piece of the artwork. So if they're not going to go to galleries and they're going to buy online at museums and everywhere else, well, that leaves you with this wealth of wonderfully interesting, at least to you, information that never gets shared. So it's a little perplexing. One of my favorite Einstein quotes says that I'm paraphrasing, the problems of today cannot be solved by the thinking that created the problems. So looking at your problems, I guess what we do next is just dream up a new platform. I honestly think that what we're doing as AWA is important. Gosh, back in the early 90s when we were starting it, we had huge debates about whether or not it was a good thing to do or a bad thing to do. Are you ghettoizing the subject matter? Or not the subject matter, the painter? Or are you actually giving them a platform that they couldn't achieve otherwise? And we decided that there was really no place for emerging women artists to even have a shot at showing their work, because idealistic or not, most of the shows at big museums are fundraisers. And if they have an audience for $80,000 paintings, are they going to want your $5,000 piece? And it's also very, very, very male-centered. And there are male artists frequently have a team of supporters that will work together to raise prices and to stabilize their market, so that their initial investment and your future are kind of hand in hand. I don't know any women who have that. We don't have those teams of backers. We don't have that kind of money behind us. We don't have someone that will pay us for a year's worth of work about a particular subject that I know of. I know it happens. Doesn't happen that often. It doesn't happen usually in this more Western context. Those of you that are more contemporary, I hope something I say is relevant. Being an artist is kind of universal, but the subject matter changes. So anyway, we're right now in a time where I'm happy to be an artist, and I love being here, and I count my blessings every day that this is what I do for work. I just can't imagine a better life. I can't imagine a better life that would have suited that shy little curly-headed girl from the farm. It's been a perfect experience, and I feel like the stories that I tell about women still have something to add to the genre. When I first started doing the Cowgirls, it wasn't because I didn't like men that I didn't draw men. I draw a couple of men every year. It's that their story inside the American West has been told very, very well and copiously. And the story of women that I think are actively engaged and here by choice, I don't think that's told that well. And I keep waiting for someone to tell other women's stories. I have a reluctance to tell stories that are not my own. But my own story's pretty much white bread. So I keep thinking there's going to be somebody come along that's going to tell all that exciting Native American lore about the Native American women and tell it engagingly and excitingly. And I'm disappointed so far that nobody's taken up that mantle, almost to the point that I'm ready to say, okay, I'm going to do some of those, even though that's not ethnically my story. None of us chose where we were born. You deal with what you deal with, and you make the world a better place as you encounter it. You can only help you. There are many, many things. There's a glass ceiling in many museums that you're going to just beat yourself bloody on. So if you want to show in that museum, do like Heidi's idea, her grand concept, and then pitch it. That got her into a lot of places, or it will. You can't take where you are. You can't wait for anybody to make you a star, kid. You could have at one time if you were a guy in New York in the 1950s, but you can't do that now. You haven't been able to do it for 30 years or more. So everywhere that you go with your art has to be guided by you. You can have an agent, and you can have help, and you can have spouses that are wonderfully supportive. It really does take a team. It took a team of people to get me on the stage today. And I have paper and a charcoal. So we need these connections. You need to know who I need to know, or I need to hear your story so I can say, oh, I have a friend, or I met the curator, or there's this collector that's looking for just that thing. So while we're here, if you guys don't talk to each other, what are you thinking? You've got to get to know each other. Doesn't matter where you live. We have Instagram, email, and telephones. So the connectiveness of who we are, if we want to make a difference. Okay, women are not good at telling their stories. You get 10 women and say, okay, go up and give me the highlights of your career. They will be so conscious of time. They'll even look at somebody and say, do I have more time? You throw one guy into that, and he's going to stand there and tell you all the important stuff that happened in his life. It's just a different mindset. So we have to get over, okay, if your mindset is that I've done pretty good for a woman, it's going to be really hard to go forward. If your mindset is that as an artist I've not accomplished enough, or if you look at your work and say as an artist I've done pretty good, that's great. But as long as you allow yourself to think of yourself as being trapped inside a subset, it's going to be really hard for somebody to help you. It'll be hard for yourself to help you, and hard for somebody else, because you just won't hear what they're saying. And I'm rambling, and I apologize. Okay, he's pretty nice. The eye's still a little wonky. You know, in your art, how you're not afraid to erase anything because you created it? Yeah, well, that goes everywhere. If you ever notice there's this little hollow right here in bulls that's always kind of transparent looking? I don't know why it's there. It always holds shadow. It's just really cool. All right, now back to the part that's kicking me. You know, what I usually do is go ahead and put the face on. And then when I get somebody I like, it's pretty easy to make the drawing fit her. And I didn't do that this time. But I can fix it.
Have you always had your art partly squared off the line and part of it going off the page?
Yes, I have. Glad you asked that. My life has never fit neatly inside any set of parameters I ever gave it. So why should my art? And it feels like it's continued somewhere else, like you're getting a little glimpse of a full life here. You're not just getting a static image. I mean, it can look contrived at times, but I just draw so big that I kept running off the page, so I came up with a theory that made it sound okay.
You have named some of your cowgirls and your paintings.
I have.
Have you done a series with the same ones sometimes?
Yes, I have. Poor Ruby has been bucked off of more horses than anybody else in the whole world. Okay, that's not working. She was beginning to look a little too smug.
She just figured out Instagram. She was feeling good about it.
Or she just figured out the symbology of what she's sitting on. The chin is still fighting. I don't mind her looking smug, actually. Or we could just cover that up with a hat. A nice thing about hat is it so neatly fits into all the same kind of mythology. I mean, like, because you can put a hat on her and put it at the angle that gives her the crescent horns as well. And then when you put the top on it, you've got a little bit of that world mountain thing going on back there. And that idea always involves, searching for yourself. Like the O'odham Indians had a story. They had a labyrinth in it, and that was where you climbed. They were. God used to live among his people in that story. Okay, I have like 5 scales going on here. And they got to be such a pest, or the humans got to be such a pest, that he decided to remove himself to a mountaintop. And that way they would only come ask him questions that mattered instead of, she did this, he did that kind of stuff. So that's part of that, climb the mountain to discover yourself thing. And a lot of self-searching is required in being an artist. Primarily, I think, because you spend so much time alone. Which I like. I like my studio. I like being in my studio. But it's fun to get out and talk to people too, as long as you don't scare yourself to death on a face that won't happen. Different woman, okay? A smaller one. Part of it is I'm not stepping back from the drawing. And when I teach, which is not all that often anymore, I always say step back, step back, step back, because you can't see it if you're right on top of it. I may have to have one of you guys come and correct this for me later. Because I'm getting her to be kind of cartoony, but I do like the hat idea. Well, we may not be any better than we were. Sorry. You guys will just have to take my word for it. I know how to draw. Okay, we'll do this. How come there are no questions? The bull will definitely be white. Well, on paper, it would be pastels, yeah. There are some beautiful soft white pastels out there. And you just build up layers, and you kind of start with a cream color, and then you whiten them as you go. And it just jumps off the paper.
So when you do put on your color, it's all pastel?
On paper, it's pastel, yes, all dry media. If I were working on canvas, it would be acrylic and charcoal only.
So would you after you sprayed the image,
Say that one more time.
after you sprayed your image to hold down your charcoal,
Uh-huh.
pastel, will it still stick?
Yeah, it will. It's still, that doesn't cause an issue. Yeah, your paper gets a little, I don't want to say stickier, but grippier. Yeah.
On canvas, are you doing a charcoal drawing and fixing it?
Yes, ma'am.
Painting on top?
Yes. I use heavy cotton canvas. I like the white color because a lot of my paint is transparent, so that the brightness of the canvas can show through. And sometimes I will gesso it white, and sometimes I will gesso it with a clear, so it's the natural cotton color coming through.
Someone on Instagram Live is asking again what kind of paper you're using.
Reeves, BFK, gray, heavyweight. Again, Reeves, BFK, gray, heavyweight. You got it.
Thank you.
Man, you mean people or other than y'all are actually seeing this? Good Lord.
It looks fantastic.
Okay, now you're ruining it for me.
She's fine.
Okay, fine. We'll do something else. How much time do I have?
All the time you need.
All right, we're going to start something else, because there was something I wanted to say about how you choose your imagery. And this one has just gotten too frustrating.
That's fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll come back to it. I'm not disowning it. I'm just moving on. And yes, it's going to stick to the back of this paper. I have to show you. Oh, gosh. You know, I don't even know anymore how much it is a sheet. I don't buy a roll because I like the flat sheets, but I buy it like 50 sheets at a time. You know, and I don't do that much artwork anymore, so I probably don't have to order 50 sheets next time I order it. It's not that I don't want to, it's just that I'm not young. Well, it's just,
Don't write yourself off just yet.
I'm not writing myself off. I'm just acknowledging that I'm not going to stay. I mean, for easily a decade, I got out to my studio every morning at 4 because life started at 7, and in those few hours that you could get before we had iPhones, there was nobody, not even your mother in a bad mood, would call you that early. So, all right, there was this one other thing I wanted to do, and I need to have the full figure to show you that. So we'll just start a fairly generic figure layout here. So our hips are going to be somewhere in here. And maybe move her down a little bit or make her bigger.
How often do you do public demos, Tom?
Gosh, I can't remember the last time I did one. Every 4 or 5 years. Kathy saw me. When was that?
You did one in Georgia.
I did.
That was a while ago.
That was 5 years ago. Okay, if I make that her waist, we've got, that should work. I feel like I need to redeem myself here, but I don't know if this is going to work or not either.
Are there any animals you've never done that you want to do?
There are many animals that I have never done. Any animal that's associated with North America, I've probably already done.
Have you done a gator?
No, I have not done a gator. What a good idea. I have, actually. A long time ago, and I did it in the Wild West show context, where she had, you know how they would use them to carry women on their trunk? So there was a cowgirl there. Okay, when I first... Pardon? Well, I think, in a way, maybe. I'm using her kind of as an every woman, so I can tell stories from mythology about strength and, I think, courage and joy, and living your life as if you deserve it. And so she, because, I don't know, she fits neat, she fills that neatly because she comes with, everybody perceives it as strength to begin with. And then you can add all kinds of other layers to that. All right, here's what I was going to talk about. When you're drawing the female figure and you're studying mythology and you see all of that stuff from way back, pecked and carved and painted into walls, and you realize that most of the females have and if this is a blue jean, you have an inscribed pubic triangle there. Just like on artwork that's 6,000 years old, which I find just absolutely fascinating. Another reason that I loved the cowboy gear and the whole idea behind the whole thing is because you can add embellishments. I mean, you can actually dress her in the full armor of a goddess of any kind. Or you can take bits and pieces from stories all over the world, and if you want her to have flames and roses and the roses are a really good woman thing. They've been recognized as a symbol of the perfect aspect of the feminine. That's not saying all feminine is perfect, but the perfect aspect of the feminine for a very, very long time. So it's not just a 1950s florist marketing scheme to get us roses. Those flowers belong to us. And so do dove. And you'll see in a lot of that old stuff, they enlarged hips, like the batwing chaps. And a lot of that was talking about bounty and abundance and fertility of the land and the people. But then you see Mabel, what was her name? A lot of the old rodeo women were quite beautiful, and they would wear those joffers. Perfect. She looks exactly like a deity that you would find stuck in a granary a long, 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 long time ago. So I love playing with all these ideas. We can let her have hands right here if we want to.
So when you put designs, say on the yoke of her shirt or on her boots, you're thinking about what those symbolize.
Absolutely. But, you know, that suffices as a mind game to keep me from getting bored in my studio, but it also is kind of real. I mean, you can look at things and recognize stories inside stories, and it makes me feel like I'm doing something that matters. And if I return even one story to one woman, See, the religion I grew up in had a lot of good aspects, and I'm not going to say anything against it. It didn't, however, have a lot of good women parts. So when I started this, the first time I read some of the books I was reading, and one of them, I don't even know if it was a good book or not, but it was called The Blade and the Chalice. By the time I was 2 chapters in, I felt like I should be sitting in my closet with a flashlight. It was heresy. Wasn't, but according to my upbringing, it kind of was. Well, loosely, that's a hand coming forward. Yes, ma'am. I know I get a crick in my neck all the time. I've made good friends with my chiropractor.
Do you enjoy smiling?
Yes, and I can actually tell you when I made that decision. I was a young mother, and I was running as hard as I could, and I had had a bit more success than I had anticipated. Because every year I always set out goals. And when I started achieving them each year, I was like, oh, what am I doing wrong? It was really stressful. And I realized I spent way too much time thinking about what I hadn't gotten done and what I had to do, and far too little time enjoying my beautiful studio, how much I love paper, the fun I had with my kiddo. So I decided that these women that I'm drawing, I want these ladies. These ladies are living in their now, and they realize that what they are living, whatever moment that is, that these are their good old days. And your now is all you got. And I think that we all could do with a little bit more appreciation of that time we have. Okay, this one has a little more life, you think? Or am I deluding myself? The bull was nice. The bull, well, I'll go back to definitely. And you know, I could actually add a bull to this one. I have all these, those bulls are gorgeous. If you guys don't go see them, you're missing rock stars. Look at that one go. I'm sorry for doing this, but it's the only way I know how to get where I need to go. There they are. Those guys. See, I could have, they were standing around this morning after they had been fed, sort of pushing the hay around on the ground and talking to each other is what it looked like. This guy was coming across. Okay. Don't hold the placement against me. We'll put it down a little bit lower. Right. When did I decide to do that? Gosh. I just think it's a byproduct. I think innately I'm kind of this cheerful, optimistic, every day's a good day kind of person. And that bleeds into your artwork. And I've been trying to practice what I preach for a long time. Okay, I just crushed charcoal on somebody's rug. So a lot of the mythic stories, a lot of the stories, if I'm trying to talk about those, they have elements that we define as whimsical because those are the same stories. I mean, Walt Disney tells those stories all the time. We see those stories, the hero and the heroine and the good and bad and all these conquests and all the elements of Earth and how we deal with them are in every kid's story and in every kid's movie. It's Star Wars was kind of about that whole sort of thing. So my drawing style is very linear, so it kind of lends itself to looking like a graphic illustration from the early part of this century. And I've never had to do illustration. I've always just kind of gotten to indulge myself in doing what I want to do. I've been really lucky that way. I have had a lot of good dogs in my life. I have one right now who's just amazing. But we've had as many as 3, and that's a lot of dog. Out in the country where we live, people dump dogs. I don't know what they're thinking. I don't know how they think they're going to survive out there. And they're just, honestly, somebody should turn them loose in the Mojave Desert and say, no, really, there's food here. That's what happened with the last one. The one before her, a friend bought from, our daughter bought for us. And, okay. So it's like the pattern goes, every 3rd dog is a rescue. Okay, I'm going to cover up the dove. And we're going to put horns out through here. And I know that they don't look quite like that, but fine-tuning can come later. That hand still works. Okay, if this guy had horns, where would they be? Somewhere around in here. Back. You can exaggerate with horns, and there aren't enough people who know the difference. So, back in here somewhere. Say that one more time, please. Sometimes I'm a little more organized. But I can't deny that this does happen. Usually I don't have an audience. So however long it takes me is not an embarrassment. Today it's kind of an embarrassment. Well, you get the idea. There are 2 of them, and they're kind of being sweet to each other. And there's an ear right back here. Actually, that has some good elements. Okay, the hands are too big, but you get the idea. That's kind of a nice compositional thing with the horns. And then if you want to add that lunar aspect to it, and lots of bulls are involved with the moon. And don't ask me to be accurate, Heidi, about any of the sizes of any of this clothing. Because we know I'm lying. And you can, I mean, every aspect of clothing that you put on somebody can have a meaning. The way that they braid and knot their hair and put it up on top of their heads, there was a whole bunch of symbology of knots. And a lot of the priestesses tied those knots for reasons. And you can kind of boil it down into, it's a decision, again. It's a choice that you've made. It's something that, and it's a public statement of a choice that you've made. And so when I put a scarf on and I tie the knot around her neck, I mean, that's a choice that she's made. So I'm running out of things to say, and that almost never happens.
Donna, Diana has a question for you.
Yes.
What motivates you to produce? Show deadlines, personal goals?
Oh, I need deadlines. I do have personal goals, yes, but I love deadlines. I love that little adrenaline rush that makes the back of your hands tingle when you go, oh my God, that's due tomorrow.
What are some of your favorite
Well, I'm most familiar with Greek and Roman, as we probably all are. So I'm most comfortable with that, and that's almost like a language that I can speak without really thinking about it. And I don't know where that question came from. Oh, okay. But I've read a lot of other things, and the only problem with having a short attention span is that I can read for a little while, and then an image will just kind of smack me in the face, and I quit and go draw. So I'm not a terribly efficient scholar. If I live long enough, I'll get through all my books. I'm sure of it. Maybe.
As I watched you drawing these particular animals, I feel they're very familiar to you, that you've done them before.
I have.
Do you approach other animals that you have not the same way?
Yes. Perhaps with a few more actual photographs in my hand. And, you know, I like to go watch them. Pardon?
Could we put a gator in there too?
Sure. I can do this. I just don't know what they look like. I know that their eyes stick up a little bit.
Seriously, I was just.
And the eyes stick up over here.
I can help you. You're over to put the gator in.
I can get I'll rough it out and she can come fix it. Not a very good gator. They're for proportion. Like I tend to go wildly out of scale. So if I can kind of lay it out with really light, loose lines that show me where everything's going to wind up, you know, shoulders, waist, hips, then I can kind of draw everything to the right proportion. If I don't do that, I'll have, I mean, like this guy's nose is like so long. Maybe he's an anteater. But you know, that's stuff that you can iron out after you get the sketch and what you want to say and do. You can go back and fix all that stuff. And you can add this, like this part of the wrinkles and the jawline, which you technically never see a jawline, but he will have nice shadows. I mean, a lot of stories about, from very simple, like the bulls pull the cart that hauls the moon across the dome of the sky, to when Egyptian stories, when, okay, anyways, again, something to do with separating the earth from the sky. And what is the other, the Zeus and Europa stories, I mean, he stands in as a bull all the time. There are a lot of moon stories, creation deity stories that involve the bull as the male creative force of the universe. So it's kind of like a yin yang, and they would use the well-endowed woman as the creative female force of the world, and then the bull, because it's so obviously male, that's my theory, as the male stand-in. So it's kind of like a yin yang idea. So if you have both of those on one page, you're not talking about a woman feeding her animals. You are, but you're not. Okay, I've struck you dumb. Huh? Thanks. All right.
So, I, first of all, I think just, yay. And this would be a real impromptu mashup here, but Carol.
No.
No, hear me out. Carol, from a marketing point of view, what should Donna do right now to tell her story to a wider audience? What, I mean, just off the top of, you said the future is this iPhone. And Donna's wrapping up her drawing and her presentation, and we're all still here.
What she should do is what Corinne's doing. She should set up a digital, her phone, and live stream it on Instagram to her feed and get questions and answers.
Okay.
And she'd be calmer because we aren't here. It's much more private. But your fans would follow every stroke and you capture a whole new audience.
Okay.
That's what I would do. Or a time lapse. Or a time lapse. I think those are time lapse.
Yes, so let's give Donna a couple more questions and then we'll wrap that up. Yeah.
Donna,
Yes, ma'am.
what is your studio practice like in terms of when you go to the studio, how long?
I go in almost every day, not always every day. Having the gallery kind of put a crimp in my style, but it's a worthwhile endeavor and it needed to be done where I was. So I go in and I, kind of bump around like a bee in a beer can for a while till I figure out what I'm doing. So, and then I always have 5 or 6 things started at the same time. And they'll talk to you as you go by. And so I can work on this one until I just can't see it anymore. And then get rid of those anteater noses before somebody actually really calls me on that. My studio is in town. I'm about 4 miles from my studio. When I was younger, oh, that was worse. When I was younger, we had property in closer to Dallas, and I could walk across the yard to my studio, which was great, because I walked across the yard at all kinds of times of day and night. Now it's in town, but it's a little town, so it's a secure feeling. I don't ever worry about. I still go down at 4. 4 o'clock's a really creative time.
Is it a public business?
It's not public like hers, which is a good idea. We have a gallery space on the bottom floor, and then on the top floor, these are buildings that we restored. They were all built in the late 1800s. And the top floor, we couldn't figure out how to make a use for it, so I just moved my studio. I had an old Presbyterian church rented, owned, and I just moved my studio from the church, which was on one block, to the upstairs above the gallery, which was on the next block. And so I'm there all the time, and about once a month I'll take my easel down, and on a Saturday morning or something I'll draw in the gallery, and people can sit and watch and take. St. Joe, Texas. Now, St. Joe, Texas is, if you go draw a line between Oklahoma City and Dallas, that would be I-35. When you cross the Red River and go into the town of Gainesville, you go west for 23 miles. And you run right into our town square. And then you stop at the one and only stoplight, and you look across the square. The only two-story building over there is my studio. So now that you guys know how to find me, thank you. It is a pretty space. We show about 30 different artists off and on from all over the country. A couple of guys here. Nancy has work in the gallery. Ann Larson has work in the gallery. Carol Sweeney has had work in the gallery. Gay Falconberry has had work in the gallery. And I know I'm forgetting you guys. I apologize. I love you even if I don't remember your name.
So Donna, once a month you go downstairs.
Kathy has had work in my gallery.
You should be live streaming that on Instagram every time you go down in the gallery.
Well, I should, and I will actually figure out how to do that. Thank you for that suggestion.
Yeah.
Because I usually draw in front of like 6 people.
One last wrap-up question, yes.
Okay. Well, they're astonishingly beautiful and graceful and fragile. Every part, just like a horse, every part of them is pretty. But on the other hand, ancient culture, us humans have always used them as a food source, and we've used every part of them for adornment and ritual. The fact that they grow antlers every year puts them into that category of animals that are part of that circle of life thing, because you can easily see how life is connected inside that belief system. You know, because they grow, they serve their purpose, they fall off, they return to the earth, they grow again. So they can be highly symbolic animals. Just their watchfulness alone is worth noting. You guys look hot.
Well, I think a huge round of applause.